Hello and welcome back. Did I not tell you that Oxventure are absolutely amazing? I love those folks. I'm so glad you got to witness just how brilliant they are. But I do feel like we're going to be following it up with a panel that is equally as fantastic because we are talking Dungeons and Designers with Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford. I couldn't ask for better guests. Thank you so much for joining me.
Marvelous to be here.
Absolutely.
Now, like I said, I am personally very excited about this panel. I had my personal list of questions that D&D made me cut down to an hour because, yes, fine, it was maybe 4 or 5 hours, but whatever. So we're going to be delving into the two books that we've had recently. So obviously we've had Icewind Dale just come out. We've got Tasha's Cauldron on the way. So I'm going to leave Tasha's Cauldron until the end, and I'm going to start off with Icewind Dale. So first of all, just in case anybody, and I'm sorry to even suggest this, but just in case anybody isn't familiar with the adventure, give me a little intro to, what they can expect.
Icewind Dale is kind of a sandbox adventure with a narrative through line running through it, but it's set in this region of the Forgotten Realms that is isolated from the rest of the world by towering mountains, glaciers, and stormy seas. And it is cold and desolate, and the people who live there are hardy, tough folk. And the adventurers find themselves in this domain wrestling with a whole bunch of problems, and also dealing with things that you often find in horror stories, monsters that will creep you out, terrors that hide in the dark, cold night, and things that have many, many secrets that lie buried and waiting under the ice.
Yeah, we're going to have to be very, very careful. We're going to tiptoe around lots of this because obviously, it's an incredible adventure. We do not want to spoil anything. So first of all, let's talk about some of the inspirations, because you described this as kind of contemporary horror, a little bit more of a modern take on that. And I'm really interested as to, kind of what that means and where you pulled your ideas from for it.
Well, when we first decided that we were going to go back to Icewind Dale, one of the key things for me was to make it feel very different from any Icewind Dale adventure or story we had done before. And so as we were brainstorming ideas and just thinking about the environment and what it's like to actually live there, it seemed like a pretty horrific place on its own. And then we hit upon this idea of delving into contemporary horror partly because people seem to really like the Gothic horror that we explored in Curse of Strahd. And here was a way to tell a story that went back to the horror well, but felt very, very different from that. And contemporary horror touches on themes that are important and sort of get at the soul of the human character when put under duress or when tested. And so I looked at things like John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a movie an ancient movie that released in 1982, that is a very simple story about a bunch of people trapped together in Antarctica, wrestling with a monster who can look like anything. And the paranoia that engenders, and of course, the way the story unfolds, the pacing of it, the dread, the inevitable confrontation, it felt like a very D&D adventure to me. And so that was certainly one of the big inspirations. But then as we were looking at the story more broadly, we thought, well, maybe there's other contemporary horror tropes or experiences or imagery that we can drop into this product as Easter eggs, and also to help just sort of push the story forward. And so we started to look at, Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining as an inspiration, and H.P. Lovecraft's short novella At the Mountains of Madness, which is about an expedition to Antarctica that discovers something horrific beyond the mountains in the ice. And so all of these things started to weave together into this tapestry or experience that became the adventure.
And Chris, I like that another piece of modern horror that is evident in the adventure is also survival horror, because
yes,
one of the main foes in this adventure is the environment itself. This adventure, particularly the further you get into it, it starts posing the question, can you survive the weather? Can you survive this avalanche that is tumbling toward you?
Exactly.
This is often the biggest monster you're up against in Rime of the Frostmaiden, the environment.
Yes. Like, take a story like Ridley Scott's movie Alien, for instance. There is, of course, the threat of the alien itself, but the fact that you're trapped in the cold vacuum of space is that is an environment that is constantly sort of pressing down on you, and you can't deal with it in the traditional way. You have to, there's nowhere to go. And so all of this survival stuff is key, I think, to the adventure. And what we tried to do was make it as easy as possible for the dungeon master to bring that to the fore and make that a central part of the experience.
I mean, you mentioned Dungeon Masters there, and I think one of the things that I found really interesting when I kind of read through this for the first time was it's definitely going to be a way for you to kind of scale up your DM skills, a way for you to show off your DM skills. Was that deliberate, or was that more once you put the elements you wanted to in, that's just how it ended up?
A little of both. I mean, some things happen accidentally, but every adventure that we do is an opportunity to learn from previous experiences, of course. And one of the goals of an adventure is to make it as easy as possible. First of all, to make it as seductive as possible so the DM wants to run it, but then make it as easy as possible for them to actually deploy all of its components at the table. And I think a lot of our effort was really directed at the latter, in sort of showing the DM how things are meant to unfold, give them some behind the scenes guidance, but not make it so overwhelming or lengthy that they feel like that becomes a barrier to actually running the adventure. There's always a fine line to walk with adventures about giving the DM too little information versus too much information. And so we tried to walk that line here and make it sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the thing I love about this book is that even though it's a big one, when you get it into your hands, it's like this is a hefty volume. As you start going through it, you'll see that the adventure has been segmented into bite-sized chunks, making a DM's preparation far easier than, say, needing to ingest, 100+ page story before you feel like you can even run a session. Here, you can actually pace your prep out to zero in on the segment of the sandbox that your group is going to deal with in the upcoming session. And that's something that we discovered, going back to what you said earlier, Chris, about we're constantly taking lessons from previous adventures and applying them to our new ones. It's something we discovered was very effective in the Essentials kit, where the adventures there are actually a series of little mini quests that you can really run as standalone adventures, but then weave them together into a broader campaign. That same principle is at play in Rime of the Frostmaiden, where if you want, you could just zero in on one of the 10 towns, you could latch on to a particular quest, and that could end up being your Rime of the Frostmaiden experience. Or you could decide to take a bunch of these quests and start stacking them together and see this larger plot unfold. And in the process, see also the horror deepen.
You touched on paranoia earlier, and this is something I really want to talk about, because something I loved is that this adventure really plays with the idea of trust and teamwork and what it means to be a party. So how do you do that, within a game that is fundamentally designed to be cooperative storytelling?
You give all the characters secrets, of course. This adventure uses something that we've never used in a 5th edition adventure before, which is during the character creation process, there are a number of secrets that can be doled out randomly or deliberately to the characters. So every character starts the game with a secret that they haven't shared with the rest of the group. Now, whether the player chooses to expose that secret or not is entirely up to them. But what we found in playtesting is that a lot of players don't want to share their secrets. And what this engenders, of course, is paranoia among the other players. and the delight in revelation when the secret finally comes out. And so we give each character these secrets. They decide whether or not to reveal them. Sometimes the adventure will force a character's hand and sort of force a secret out into the open, and then the whole party becomes aware of it. And how does that affect them? How does that affect their trust going forward? Not just the characters' trust of each other, but the players' trust of each other. So I think this fun mechanic, the secrets mechanic, is going to really get at this idea of secrets breeding paranoia within the party. Now, the party is still coherent. They've still got goals that they share, but this kind of puts a little needle up against the balloon. And you know, if one player has a very dark secret, it could change the way that the adventure flows, and that could be a very fun thing to experience. Now, not all the secrets are game changers. Some of them are purely innocent or just kind of interesting, but they aren't going to affect play. But you don't know, which characters have what secrets. If they're all benign, you're very lucky. If, one of you turns out to be a cannibal, that could change things a little bit.
But again, even with the secrets, the thing I love, going back to the toolkit nature of this adventure, is not only can the DM decide which quests to run in which order, each group gets to decide how to engage with these secrets. Because, Chris, as you mentioned, a group could embrace it, really revel in the storytelling opportunities of the paranoia. Or if that's not a particular group's jam, you could just tell each other your secrets right at the beginning, and then instead you're experiencing the kind of almost more of a monster hunting style story, which is sort of a genre adjacent to horror, where actually all the cards are laid out on the table and at the beginning, and then you would just together decide, how are we going to deal with this? And that could that could include the Hannibal-esque member of your party just informing you all at the beginning that they're a cannibal.
Just want to put that out there. Hope you're all cool with it. Yeah. I mean, as a player myself, inclusion. As a player myself, if I got something that I knew was going to be detrimental to the party, I'd probably spill the beans. But sometimes some players aren't like that, and everybody's got different play styles.
I mean, I know I'm a secretive player. I know it. If I'm a cannibal, that's getting hidden for the whole game. Surprise. So, I guess speaking of cannibals, creatures, because this is, as you mentioned, this is a kind of familiar location for us, but with a fresh take on it. So, what new creatures can we expect? Because obviously, it's the perfect setting for it.
Indeed, and since our adventures assume that DMs only have the 3 core rulebooks, as we were looking at this story and fleshing out encounters, we found that the selection of cold-dwelling monsters in the monster manual was relatively small, and so we wanted to expand upon that and give the DM what is basically a mini monster manual tucked away in this book. Over 50 pages of monsters. Now, not all of them are cold themed. Some of them are themed to other parts of the adventure. But there are a lot more cold monsters in there now that you can play with and add to the campaign. And we hope that DMs, upon seeing this big bestiary tucked in the back of the book, will be inspired then to create their own encounters in Icewind Dale, following the models basically laid out in the book.
And one thing too, I think it's worth pausing on, Chris, is that Icewind Dale, despite being this perilous place, draws people from all over the Forgotten Realms, and not just people, but also monsters of various sorts. So as people go through this bestiary, they will find things where they'll pause and think, what is this doing in this Arctic wasteland? Well, there's a reason in the story for it. And people find their way to Icewind Dale for a variety of reasons. Some of them went there seeking adventure. Something people will discover in Rime of the Frostmaiden is Icewind Dale is home to a prison, a high security prison. So there are also people who've been sent to Icewind Dale to serve out usually a lifelong sentence, and perhaps someone you meet has escaped from that prison. So there are all sorts of reasons for why you might find something you would never expect to find, as snow is falling heavily in this wintry wasteland.
I have to say, this sounds like a really fun adventure. I'm assuming they're all fun to write, dream job. But I do think that this in particular seems like it's been a real melting pot of pulling together lots of the best bits of what makes D&D so great. So what is the process when you know, okay, we need a new adventure? Do you have specific aims for it? Or is it more about, you saw a great monster and you're like, okay, this is where I'm starting?
Usually I'm given a sense of where the adventure has to be set or placed. And then the challenge becomes, how do we make that interesting? And there's usually a series of brainstorming meetings that occur where we just throw out all kinds of crazy ideas and then try to untangle them later. And not every idea that we come up with will land or ultimately make it in the book, but there's never any shortage of ideas, particularly once you bring the writers in and they bring their own ideas to the mix. But what's important to me is that whatever ends up in the book has to say something, either about the world or about the nature of something, or about the nature of just humanity, getting at some of the foibles or issues that we as humans have to wrestle with. Because I find that when players and their characters go on these adventures, if the adventure has a layer of truth to it based on something that we can experience in the real world, it's going to resonate on a level far greater than it would have absent that material. And so I'm always looking for that thing. And sometimes, like in the case of Curse of Strahd, which is a Gothic tale about the fall of a man into darkness and how he poisons everything around him, Icewind Dale has got its own core, and around that core, all these other events spiral outward. And that core, of course, is the Frostmaiden herself. She's a very complicated figure.
And we
That's one way to describe her.
and we purposefully say little about her publicly, partly because we want people who play the adventure to experience her, right there at the game table, and not have their experience of the Frostmaiden mediated through something we said in an interview like this.
Yeah. What's interesting about her in particular is, like Strahd, she engenders some sympathy. She, of course, is doing bad things, as all evil figures in D&D do, but I like her for that, and it gave us a lot to play with and gave the story some more dimension.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it gives the story a mythological heft that if as you're going through the various quests and facing the perils of Icewind Dale and wintry monsters, cannibals, but as you start digging into the Frostmaiden's story, you start tapping into this more mythic strain, and you see that there is far more going on here than a group of people and monsters simply trying to survive in the wilderness. Exactly.
But it deals with questions like how do people react to a hostile environment when they're deprived of food, or when they're cornered, or they're suspicious that there might be a monster hiding in their midst. People start to behave differently. They start to act differently. They start to do irrational things. This is a great opportunity to really kind of get at some psychological ideas.
So before we move on to Tasha's Cauldron, if you had one tip, whether for adventurers or DMs as they kind of venture into Icewind Dale, what would you say to them before they set off?
For DMs, I'd say, you don't have, because as Jeremy had pointed out earlier, it's a hefty book. There's a lot in there. Focus on what you like. Take it apart. Make it your own. The canon of your world can be whatever you want it to be. Add your own stuff. Mix things around. If you just like a map, take the map. Do something fun with it. If you like an idea, but it's not explored in detail as much as you'd like, you can expand upon it. It's your adventure now. For the players, I'd say, despite the adventurer's attempts to drive a wedge between you, stick together, shared bodily warmth. Don't split the party. Icewind Dale is very unforgiving, especially if you get caught in a blizzard.
And on that note, the other important tip is bring a coat.
I like it. Yeah, basic life tip. I feel like you could use that one inside and outside of D&D, so That's great. All right, we're doing it. We're moving on to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So first of all, how does it feel to just have at least the reveal of it out in the world?
It's a wonderful feeling because the team and I have been working on Tasha's Cauldron since early 2019. So this has been a labor of love for us for well over a year. Many of the pieces of this book have been out in public because of our Unearthed Arcana series. So, people have actually been getting a taste of what's bubbling in this cauldron for many, many months now. And finally, when the book comes out on November 17th, they'll get to see how all of that material came together to make this, wondrous witch's brew, which not only includes the pieces that they saw in Unearthed Arcana, but also other content that will be wholly new to them. The key, though, is that all of the major player character content, especially the many new subclasses in the book, everyone has actually already seen all of them because, of course, a big part of how we work on 5th edition is engage in this ongoing conversation with the community about what they want to see in their player character options. And so when they open up chapter 1 of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to look at all of the new player character options, they're going to see essentially a group of friends they met over the course of the last year and a half and see, a few things have changed. Maybe the genie patron got a new haircut, or this other subclass has a new coat. But the core of those elements are really going to feel familiar for people, and I think they're going to also be really excited because we know, based on the playtest feedback that we got, people love this content. One of the things that struck us over the past year is that most of the content that we were designing for this book just got high satisfaction score after high satisfaction score after high satisfaction score. There were a few things that didn't score high. Those got heavier revisions, or in a few cases, we bid them a fond farewell, and perhaps we will see those elements in a future book.
Fantastic. I mean, that's what I wanted to hear. I'm very happy. High satisfaction. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to hear. So how do you decide at kind of D&D when you're ready for something like this? Because obviously this is, a huge rules expansion. It will really transform the way a lot of people play. So how do you know, okay, it's time?
So we began working on this, about when we felt sort of close to 2 years out from when we expected the game is going to be ready for another dose of expansion options. And this book, and we've signaled this to you in the title, is very much a follow-up to Xanathar's Guide to Everything. I mean, that's why we made sure everything is in the title, because we wanted to be very clear from the get-go. This is another book in that line, and that is a line of expansions to the whole game, because this book not only has new material for players, but also new options for dungeon masters. And we felt that, 3 years out from Xanathar's Guide, it was time to introduce a new set of options to give people fresh takes on things that we knew they love. I mean, because we know so many of us who play D&D, we return to these elements that just tickle our fancy over and over again. Some of us have played the same type of character countless times over the years, but even when there's something you love, it's nice to get a new twist. And so a lot of this book is about giving you new twists. And that you see that not only in these new subclass options, but this book also introduces, for the first time in 5th edition, a set of new class features for every class in the player's handbook. So when you come to this book, if you have been, say, playing barbarians for the last 6 years, and you still want to play more barbarians, you're going to find at least you now have a new feature or two that you can add to your character sheet that provide some twists on how you experience your character. And so people who got to give us feedback on those class feature options really were sort of involved in us in a deep way in this conversation, in evolving these classes, in creating these new options. And those new options, by the way, that were in the class feature option Unearthed Arcana were the most liked options we have ever done in Unearthed Arcana. So the message to us, and clearly to Milo, Chris's dog, who is agreeing, who clearly loves class feature options, we saw the message from the community was clear that these options belong in a book like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And they join things like group patrons, which we can delve into, new spells, new magic items, the full sidekick rules, magical environments, puzzles, so much to talk about in this book.
Yeah, let's start delving. I know that's what people want. We need to start delving. So I'm going to start off with subclasses, because obviously that has been one of the areas that, has just lit up social media. We're all very excited. I'm glad you mentioned barbarians, because that's my lifelong, I never move away from barbarian. So very excited about Path of Wild Magic. But how do you make sure, tell us a little bit about subclasses, but also what I'm really interested in is how you make sure you're staying true to a class and its place within kind of D&D, whilst also, providing that fresh take, that new way to experience that particular class.
So when we're doing our initial design of subclasses, we're always looking for a bit of territory that we haven't explored yet for a particular class. And so, for instance, with the Barbarian, we had not yet done one that was taking the theme of wildness, that is a part of the Barbarian, but then associating that with the theme of wild magic. And so that for us was a natural fit, a very natural territory for us to wander into and explore. But for us, that's only the first step. Then we'd look to the community through Unearthed Arcana and ask them, is this a realm you want us to venture into? And sometimes the community tells us no. In this case, the answer was yes. And so when we get that yes back, then we push further. And it's at that point that we refine the design, we make sure it's balanced with the other options available to members of that class, because we also want to make sure that when we introduce a new option, it feels at home with its subclass siblings. Keeping in mind, though, that every subclass has different strengths and different weaknesses. So people will see that a particular subclass in this book or in Xanathar's guide or in the player's handbook might be very good at one thing and not so good at another, but then another subclass is great at that thing that their sibling is not so good at. But if you bring them together, they can form a very complementary group, which is also always a big part of our design, is we're not only exploring ways in which we can enhance your experience as a barbarian, to keep using the barbarian as an example, but we also want to look for ways that your character can bring something new to the group, because D&D at its heart is a co-op game, and no character exists in a vacuum. And we always want to make sure that when we introduce one of these new options, you're not only going to be happy that you're playing it, but your fellow players are also going to be excited to see that new option brought to the table. And so that's why there are often little bits, even in the classes that tend to be mostly about their own power, we still always want to make sure there's something there that either empowers their friends or at least injects a little bit of delight in the group play experience. Whether it's because they're summoning some neat creature that everyone will be delighted at seeing, appear at the table, or some other thing that subclass brings that the subclasses in the game had not yet done. Because I often like to say we are in the happiness business, and we always want to make sure that everything we create, especially in a major rules expansion like Tasha's Cauldron, has the potential to bring renewed smiles to a group. Even a group that's been playing every week since 5th edition came out, we want them to open up this book, take some of these options, and suddenly their game is going to feel brand new all over again.
Yeah, and all the options have to work for all the worlds that are out there.
Yes.
Too. This is an expansion to the core game, and so every option needs to be something that the players and the DM feel like can work in the world in which they're playing.
And that is a key point, not only about the subclasses, but about everything in this book. It has to have potential hooks in every D&D setting, because this is a setting agnostic book, and we make sure that the material here is going to be at home no matter what D&D setting you're in. Now, that said, a DM might want to tailor the particular narrative of a game option for their world, because we know many DMs, part of their joy is customizing their world, and that can include customizing the story of a particular player character option. But we always want to make sure that the game design itself doesn't assume you're playing in Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms or Eberron or some other setting. We want to make sure that you can take these options and drop them into any world. And so with that in mind, people will see in Tasha's Cauldron references to many different D&D worlds. And so that you see that in the text itself, that we occasionally will say, in Eberron, you might meet a person from this particular group who is a member of this subclass, whereas in this other world, they might appear in this other way.
So you mentioned subclasses kind of bringing something new to the party. So let's talk actually bringing something new to the party, starting off with sidekicks. So this is something that we kind of seen a little bit before. I know I kind of tested those out, and I'm really excited to see them become official, because I feel like they add so much. So, what are you most excited about sidekicks doing for our adventuring?
So first, I'm just thrilled that people will finally get to see the sidekick rules in all their glory. People have gotten to play a bit with sidekicks in the Essentials kit, but it's important to understand that those were in essence pre-built sidekicks, using our sidekick system under the hood. Now in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the DM is getting that sidekick system so that the DM can build sidekicks basically until the cows come home, because we give you guidelines to create sidekicks of any sort. And we really took to heart after the Unearthed Arcana on sidekicks that people want sidekicks to be as simple as possible. So anyone who is familiar with the sidekick Unearthed Arcana and then looks at the official version will be struck by how simple and elegant the 3 sidekick classes are. An interesting thing that we heard in the playtest feedback about sidekicks is that many people liked them so much they wanted to play them as their character. And so in the book, we tell you, hey, if you want, this doesn't even have to be a sidekick. This could just be your character. If you want to play, one of these 3 sidekick classes, the warrior, the expert, or the spellcaster, and you really enjoy the simplicity that they bring, and also in a few cases some unique abilities. They have a particular combination of abilities that is all their own. A number of those abilities echo things that people will be familiar with in the Player's Handbook classes, but the way they're mixed together in the sidekick classes is a new special brew. And DMs can take that and, again, not only make NPC sidekicks for the group, but hey, players, think of this as 3 new classes available to you in Tasha's Cauldron.
Yeah,
I really love that. I actually hadn't thought of it that way at all.
Yeah, the sidekick rules were great in the Essentials Kit because the Essentials Kit was built on the assumption that you could be playing with 1 DM and 1 player. And sometimes it's nice for that player to have a sidekick handy who can kind of help round out their group, bring skills and abilities that the one character doesn't have. But in the sidekicks, as they're presented in Tasha's, you can go with that model. You can have a sidekick for the whole party. You could have multiple sidekicks in the party. It's very versatile and a great way to bring something into the party that it doesn't have.
And on top of that, yet another aspect of flexibility that DMs are gaining with the sidekick rules is they are a much simpler way to create NPCs than the guidelines we provide in the Dungeon Master's Guide. In the DMG, we tell you can take character classes from the Player's Handbook, and you could apply levels, to a monster or to one of the NPCs in the NPC appendix of the monster manual. That works, but that brings all of the complexity of a full player-facing character class. DMs can now use these sidekick classes to customize their NPCs and do so in a way that is, again, much more elegant. It's going to, I think, reduce their prep time. So I could see a number of DMs using the sidekick rules to create NPCs who are not even sidekicks.
Yeah.
And we acknowledge that in the book as well, that it is a supremely flexible new little system that we provide in this book.
And I hope it's not too much of a spoiler, but your sidekick doesn't even have to be like a person, right?
That's correct. The sidekick rules are so flexible, and we not only tell you this in the text, but we show you this in the art, that like one of the sidekicks, and I think on the team, all of us, our favorite sidekick, depicted in the book, because we depict 9 different sidekicks just to show the huge range of sidekick possibilities. I think our favorite across the board is the wolf we show, because the wolf has amazing personality, and depending on the viewer, and I'm looking forward to everyone else once they see the book forming an opinion. You either think the wolf is missing an eye or that the wolf is winking at you. And this is one of those things where I love it, just to ask a person, so what do you think? Is the wolf missing an eye or giving you a friendly wink?
I love it. Well, something else that we've got for groups, which I'm really excited about, is group patrons. So tell us more about that.
We introduced the concept of group patrons in Eberron, Rising from the Last War, a book focused all about that world with its magic-fueled technology. And we explored the concept there because in Eberron, characters are almost always embroiled in the machinations of various organizations. the response to group patrons was positive enough that we thought this is a concept we could take, even though we developed it specifically for Eberron, and we could generalize it and create patron options that would work in any D&D setting. And we explored that concept. We liked it enough that it made it into this book. In fact, the group patrons get their own chapter of the book. And we provide a list of different group patrons that your group can choose if you want to engage with this option. And if you do choose it, your relationship with that patron could end up flavoring your entire campaign. For instance, if you decide we actually work for an ancient being, once you've decided who that ancient being is, and one of the examples we give in the book is Azalin the Lich from Old Ravenloft. Once you've decided who your ancient being patron is, that could have a major effect on what you're doing in your campaign, why you're doing it, why is your ancient being patron asking you to do this, like what is their motivation, and we provide you a variety of perks that your group can get if you decide to engage with this patron system and do quests for your patron. We've also introduced a benefit that was not in the Eberron book, that if you decide to have a patron, that is a sign that your group has sort of an extra level of cohesion. And because of that, your group is a limited number of times per day is able to just essentially give each other inspiration. In other words, give each other advantage on certain roles as a sign of you being drawn together with this clear common purpose, whether it's you work for the ancient being I mentioned, or a religious order, or an academy, or a military group, a criminal syndicate, whatever you pick, that is going to draw you together as you figure out not only what does our patron want of us, but what is our relationship with them? Because we point out in the book, you might not necessarily be on great terms with your patron, because in a way they could be that boss you love, or they could be that boss where it's like, oh my goodness, we just got another order.
From the big dragon on the mountain. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And the boss terrifies us, but we've got to do it.
The perks.
Or your patron could be someone your group has great fondness for, a almost a family connection to them, warmth, caring. Your group gets to explore what that relationship means. And then for your DM, it gives a powerful storytelling tool, because we think of this as much of a DM tool as it is for players. Because if a DM has ever struggled a little bit for how do I bring this group of adventurers together? They have such disparate backgrounds. How do I give them a common purpose? I might be struggling as I create this campaign to really come up with a through line in terms of the theme. The group patron can help a DM address those campaign design issues. Because if the group of players is like, yep, we want to work for a sovereign, and then the DM will figure out, okay, this might be this queen or that king or this duke or that duchess. That suddenly could, depending on the campaign setting that the DM is using, that could end up like writing half the campaign for the DM. Like, well, just as a consequence of them working for this person and I as the DM knowing what that person is involved in, half the campaign just unfolded on its own. So again, powerful tool also for dungeon masters.
One of my favorite illustrations in the book is of one of the patrons, and it's a merfolk king.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is glorious he has a crown of fish orbiting his head as he looks at you with a wonderfully inscrutable look. It's and the artist captured it perfectly of, Is he happy with us? Is he unhappy? We're not sure. but he is our sovereign, and we will embark on this mission that he has set for us.
Well, speaking of our sovereigns, I'm going to talk DMs, because obviously you touched on it a little bit there. This does kind of open up new possibilities for DMs. I think Tasha's Cauldron for Everything has got a lot to offer. So, what can DMs look forward to and adventurers prepare themselves for?
So, in addition to the sidekick rules that we've mentioned, the storytelling opportunities that DMs can discover in the group patrons, we also have guidance for DMs on running what the community often refers to as a session zero. We have talked about this in D&D materials over the years, but we realized we had not given it its due in a 5th edition book. So Tasha's Cauldron has a section specifically on running that session before your first session, when you're creating characters, coming up with the story, setting ground rules in terms of what makes your group comfortable or uncomfortable, so that you can, before play even starts, make sure you're setting your group up for having a happy, collaborative time. We also, for DMs, give you guidelines on parlaying with monsters. This is a little bonbon of a section. Make no mistake, we are not presenting a heavy rule system for parlaying with monsters. This is actually us presenting a set of delightful tables that a DM can choose from or roll on to figure out what a particular type of monster might especially desire. And then if the players are able to provide that thing that the monster desires, they might be able to dispel a conflict before it even starts. And so we provide some guidelines on figuring out what is it that a monster desires. And then if you provide it, you might be able to turn what might have been a conflict into a delightful conversation. We also, for DMs, have a whole new set of rules for magical environments, and you will get to discover here what happens when you're in a region, for instance, that has been saturated with magic from the far realm, and we give you rules for dealing with that. What if you're in a massive realm that's haunted, or that is a mirror zone where suddenly things in mirrors in this particular region have come to life? All of that here is for DMs. We also have a section for DMs filled with puzzles designed by puzzle designer Elisa Teague that DMs can take and introduce to any campaign to really present a different type of gameplay. A lot of D&D groups are used to lots of role play, combat, exploration. Not every group, though, has tested their hands or their minds at solving puzzles, and we wanted to provide a really easy way for DMs to introduce puzzle solving to D&D groups. And so the puzzle section of this book is all about doing exactly that. Two other big things for DMs. There's a lot here. There are new spells in the book, which are both for dungeon masters and for players. And I always like to remind players of that. When you see that awesome new spell and you're excited for your character to cast it, remember the DM's NPCs are also now going to be able to cast this spell. So you might have to watch out. And then we also have a bunch of new magic items and new artifacts. Some of the artifacts in this book are going to be campaign defining for some of the DMs who decide to introduce those artifacts into their campaigns. And that includes Baba Yaga's Mortar and Pestle, Igwil's Demonomicon, the Crook of Rao, the Mighty Servant of Luco, a lot of classic artifacts from D&D's history, as well as some new ones are here in this book.
One of my favorite parts of the magic item chapter is the magic spellbooks.
Yes.
If players are lucky enough to get their hands on.
Yeah, one of the things that we endeavored to do in the new magic items is to include new spellcasting focuses that are magic items for the game's spellcasters, and that includes a whole set of different magic spell books that wizards can get their hands on. And in addition to having spells in those books, which is one of the things wizards want most, wizards are always hungry for more spells, those books can themselves be used as a spellcasting focus and give the wizard new powers. This, finally, when it comes to magic items, this book also has the magic tattoos that appeared in Unearthed Arcana, and people will be able to not only see those tattoos on their characters, but again, reminder to players, NPCs might start showing up with these magic tattoos.
That's a hard item to steal if it's on an NPC.
Yes.
I mean, depends if you're a cannibal. I can think of ways around it. I think I could do it. So obviously you mentioned puzzle. This is something I'm really excited about. I love puzzles. So how do you make sure that, because I feel like you've got D&D brains, when you've been working on D&D as long as you have, that's how your brain works. My brain's on a lower level. Am I also going to be able to make it through these puzzles, or is this just the end of every campaign for me now?
No, absolutely, because the way the puzzle system is designed, it presents each puzzle as a thing that you can just drop into your game. But there's also a section in each puzzle called hint checks, which is a system by which the DM can help the players overcome an obstacle and get a little bit of information. They make an ability check, and the text tells the DM what the characters learn if that ability check succeeds. And so every puzzle has a number of these hints, and the DM can let them trickle out. It's a good system to help the players feel like they are actually solving the puzzle, but not getting lost in it.
Yeah, because puzzles have always been a fascinating part of D&D in that they are a play experience that test the player, whereas most of the things in D&D, like combat, for instance, or a social interaction where you're using your skills, test the character. And so we wanted to preserve that core experience of puzzles, which is it's actually something for the player to solve, but we wanted to make it so that each player could essentially turn to their character and say, help.
Yes, exactly. Your intelligence 18 wizard should be able to solve an anagram, whereas you, the player, might struggle with that, and that's cool.
Yeah. So in a way, you get to come to each of these puzzles with two minds, yours and your characters.
I did mention that my character's a barbarian, right? I just want to throw that out there. So, I don't know if that's worse than just having one mind, but...
If all else fails, you have your axe. That's a good puzzle solver, too.
Yes.
Thank you. So when we're coming up with kind of items and spells, obviously there's loads of kind of great new bits and pieces in this. Love the tattoos. Very excited about those. What are they kind of, how do you approach that process? Are you thinking of, okay, there are elements that or like problems we need to solve? Or is it something you're kind of thinking where you think, oh, there's something great I would love to do or see, and that's where it comes from?
So our process for a book like this, when it comes to spells and magic items and even rules for the DM, it's actually very similar to how we approach subclasses. We look for territory we haven't explored yet, and then start doing initial forays into that territory to see, is there something here? And so an example of that in the magic items are all of these magic spellcasting focuses. We have a couple of those in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but we realize with those couple of options, we're not serving the full range of spellcasters in the game, and we really could create a really nice, flavorful set of magic spellcasting focus options for our characters. And so that was, that's something we wanted to do. The tattoos we wanted to do because magic tattoos have appeared in D&D at different times. We realized we haven't done it yet in 5th edition. This book also has some psionic themed subclasses, and often in D&D, for whatever reason, tattoos have often shown up in things that also have psionics. So we thought this is a natural combo. And then also sometimes we are wanting to explore better play experiences. A great example of this type of design are the new summoning spells. This book includes a suite of new summoning spells, which people got a preview of in Unearthed Arcana. And these are not only meant to provide a fun new option, but they're also an example of us exploring what we think is a more elegant, enjoyable way to engage with summoning than, frankly, the summoning spells we provide in the Player's Handbook. Those spells still have a place, and we actually make sure in designing these new options that they can coexist with the Player's Handbook spells. That's why they don't do the same thing. The Player's Handbook conjuring options allow you a fair amount of liberty to figure out what it is you're going to summon, but that also has a fair amount of overhead for the players and the DMs, because they're going to have to go rifle through the monster manual to find those stat blocks and whatnot. So there's kind of there is an at the table weight to those spells, and we wanted to explore a type of summoning that would basically be speedier, easier to engage with, something that players and DMs knew, like, yep, you can just call out that creature right away and have it engage without there being a pause as we all go for looking at our monster books to see, what thing do we want to summon. And so these new summoning spells are all about giving you a stat block right in the spell and giving you a few customization options. You choose those and away you go. For the people who still want to be able to go into their monster manual and choose from a big list, you can still do that using the conjuring spells that are in the Player's Handbook.
Fantastic. Well, we're right into the last few minutes of this panel. So what I wanted to do was ask you really quickly, like one sentence or left, for each of you, what are you most excited about that we're going to see in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything?
It is difficult for me to choose because this has been my baby for almost 2 years, and I love so much that is in it. And so I will boil my answer down to this. The thing I'm most excited about is people getting their hands on the options. That just collectively, this toy box of new things they will get to experience in their character, in their campaign, that's what I'm excited about. So really, I'm thinking of it all as this just big cauldron, and I'm excited for them to dive into that cauldron itself and to have all of the material commented on by Tasha, the amazing wizard who is the point of view character throughout the book.
I was going to say, I'm excited about bringing Tasha back into the fore and making her a central character in our ongoing D&D story. I'm also excited about playing a option from this book in my Saturday game at D&D Celebration. So I'll be playing an artificer subclass, but I won't tell you which one. It's a secret.
Very smooth. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I feel like I got most of my questions in, so I'm very, very happy. I hope that everybody watching loved that, because there's so much we could tell you, but we got as much as we could in there. Don't forget, obviously, that you can pick up Icewind Dale right now. Go out and get it. What are you doing? And of course, you can already pre-order Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, so that it will be in your hands on November 17th, and you can dive into everything that we have discussed here. But Chris, Jeremy, and Milo, thank you so much for joining me today. And next up, we have got How We Roll, more fantastic live play for you. So we'll be right back